Don't be afraid. 3 words, said by a Black American soldier to a Japanese nurse in the ruins of 1945. They'd been taught to fear each other. Propaganda, lies, years of hate on both sides. But when a segregated medical unit arrived at a hilltop clinic, something broke. A soldier who wasn't allowed to save white lives, now holding the hand of an enemy. A nurse who expected monsters, finding mercy instead. Then the rules came down. Separate treatment areas. No touching. No trust. When a child stopped breathing and orders said let her die, one medic made a choice. His own command turned on him. The camera captured everything. And those 3 words, "Don't be afraid," became an act of defiance that could end him. What happens when kindness is called treason? And how much will one man risk to prove that saving a life is never wrong? The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the canvas covering the truck bed. Corporal Isaiah Freeman, everyone called him Zay, sat with his helmet on his knees and watched the road wind upward through the mist. Ahead, somewhere in the gray afternoon, was a clinic they'd been ordered to secure. "You think they'll throw rocks at us?" asked Private Davis from across the truck. Sergeant Lionel Reed, sitting near the tailgate, didn't look up. "Stack your weapons outside like the lieutenant said. We're medics, not infantry. Act like it." Zay nodded but said nothing. He'd heard the stories. Japanese civilians taught that Americans would torture and kill. And here they were, a segregated Black medical unit sent to survey a rural clinic while white units handled the cities. Separate and unequal, even in peacetime. The truck lurched to a stop. The hilltop clinic stood before them, small and weathered, with blackout curtains still hanging in the windows. Reed jumped down first, boots splashing in a puddle. "Helmets off, satchels only. Freeman, you're with me." Zay grabbed his medical bag and followed Reed up the stone steps. Inside, the air smelled of iodine and old wood. A steel cabinet scraped across the floor, someone barricading a door. Zay's heart hammered. He set down his helmet and raised both hands, palms open. From his breast pocket, he pulled a small, worn phrasebook. His finger found the page. "Kawagaranide," he said slowly, the syllables clumsy in his mouth. Then, in English, softer, "Don't be afraid." Silence. Then a young woman in a stained nurse's uniform stepped into the dim light. Her hands trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. She sank onto a wooden bench, covering her face. Behind her, an older woman, gray hair tied back, raised one hand for quiet. She studied Zay's face, then Reed's, then the other medics standing respectfully in the doorway. Finally, she nodded once. "Arigato," she whispered. Zay let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The boy arrived just as the last sunlight faded from the windows. 2 neighbors carried him on a bamboo pallet, whispering urgently to the older woman, Mrs. Sato, Zay had learned. The child's skin burned under Zay's palm. "Water," Zay said, miming drinking. The young nurse, Keiko, Mrs. Sato. Sato had called her, hurried to a basin and filled a tin cup. Her hands still shook, but she worked quickly, efficiently. Zay soaked a cloth and pressed it to the boy's forehead. Reed appeared in the doorway. "Local police outside, wants to see our orders." "Show him," Zay said without looking up. "We're not leaving this kid." Reed's boots retreated. Keiko knelt across from Zay and checked the boy's pulse, counting silently. Their eyes met. She nodded, too fast. Zay mixed salt into boiled water, remembering field training. Rehydration, basic, but it might be enough. The boy's breathing slowed, deepened. Keiko whispered something in Japanese, a prayer maybe, and placed her hand briefly on the child's chest. Outside, voices rose, Reed's calm baritone and a sharper, clipped Japanese accent. The policeman wanted paperwork, wanted proof they weren't looters. Reed's answer carried through the thin walls. "We're medical personnel under General MacArthur's occupation authority. Here are our orders, signed and stamped." Minutes passed. The boy stirred, coughed weakly. His fever was dropping. The policeman left. Reed came back inside, rain dripping from his shoulders. Curfew at 2000 hours. We'll bivouac down the hill and return at dawn. Zay looked at Keiko. We come back, he said slowly, pointing to himself, then to the floor, then raising his hand like the sun rising. Tomorrow. She understood. Hi, yes, tomorrow. Mrs. Sato brought them rice balls wrapped in cloth, payment they couldn't refuse. Reed divided them among the squad outside. As they loaded into the truck, Zay glanced back. Keiko stood in the clinic doorway, watching them go. Rain drummed on the canvas tent. Zay sat on his cot, cleaning instruments by flashlight. Scalpel, forceps, thermometer. Everything had to be ready for morning. Across the tent, Reed scratched notes onto a report form, his handwriting cramped and precise. The other medics played cards in low voices, too tired to bet more than cigarettes. Boots crunched on gravel outside. The tent flaps snapped open. Attention, Reed barked. Lieutenant Warren Harlan stepped inside, rainwater beading on his officer's cap. He was white, clean-shaven, and his uniform looked freshly pressed despite the weather. His eyes swept the tent, the mud-caked boots, the damp socks hanging on a line, the makeshift desk made from a ration crate. Report, Sergeant. Reed stood. Sir, we secured the clinic at 1600 hours. No hostiles. Treated one civilian child for fever. Withdrew at 1930 per curfew. Hostiles? Harlan's voice was dry. Sergeant, these are enemy civilians. You don't treat them like patients at a county hospital. Sir, the child needed... I don't care what the child needed. Harlan pulled a folded paper from his jacket. You'll return tomorrow to inventory their supplies. Nothing gets distributed without my authorization. And keep your distance from the women. Understood? Zay's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes on his hands. Understood, sir, Reed said. Harlan signed the ration chit with a flourish and handed it to Reed. Dawn inspection. Don't embarrass me. After he left, the tent stayed quiet. Zay pulled out a pencil and a thin sheet of airmail paper. He wrote slowly, carefully. Dear Mama, today I met a nurse with steady hands. He didn't mention the lieutenant. He didn't mention the way Harlan had said enemy civilians, like they weren't human. Mama had enough to worry about in Alabama. Reed turned off his flashlight. Lights out. 0530 wake up. Zay folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket, knowing it would take weeks to reach home, if it reached home at all. Dawn came gray and cold. Zay's breath fogged as the truck rattled back up the hill. The clinic courtyard was empty, except for a few early risers carrying water buckets. Harlan arrived in a jeep with 2 white MPs, their polished boots gleaming. He walked through the clinic like he owned it, glancing into rooms, running a gloved finger along a windowsill. Keiko stood near the supply cabinet, her face carefully blank. Mrs. Sato sorted bandages in silence. Sergeant Reed, Harlan said, I want a sign painted. 2 treatment areas, 1 for U.S. personnel, 1 for locals. Keep it orderly. Reed's voice stayed level. Sir, there's only 6 of us and 30 townspeople who need care. Then prioritize. Harlan turned to one of the MPs. Paint the sign, English and Japanese. Zay watched from the doorway as the MP pulled out a board and began chalking letters. Separate treatment areas. The words felt like a slap. Zay had crossed an ocean to escape Jim Crow, only to find it waiting for him here, in a ruined country that wasn't even his enemy anymore. Keiko's eyes met his for a half second. He saw anger there, carefully hidden. She lowered her gaze and turned back to her work. Townspeople began arriving. An old man with a cut hand, a woman cradling a crying infant. They stopped when they saw the sign, confused. One of the MPs pointed. That side, Japanese side. The old man hesitated, then shuffled to the left. The woman followed. A line formed, silent and uncertain. Harlan clapped Reed on the shoulder. See? Order. That's what command wants. Keep it up. He left in the jeep, dust rising behind him. Zay picked up his satchel and crossed to the American side, even though no Americans were there. Reed caught his eye and shook his head slightly. Not now, not here. But Zay's hands were already reaching for gauze and iodine, ready to pass them quietly across the invisible line when no one was looking. By mid-morning, the clinic had found a rhythm. Zay worked on the American side, treating minor wounds from the two soldiers who'd wandered in with blisters and a rash. But his real work happened in glances and gestures. Keiko checked a woman's pulse on the Japanese side. Zay caught her eye and tapped his wrist twice, too fast. She nodded and reached for a blanket to calm the patient. When Mrs. Sato needed a sterilized clamp, Zay left it on the supply table between the two areas. When he ran low on bandages, Keiko quietly restocked the shelf nearest him. They spoke in broken fragments. Pulse, Zay would say, and Keiko would repeat it. Parusu. Then she'd teach him. Shinzo, heart. Reed stood near the door, watching the street. His job wasn't medical now. It was guard duty, keeping trouble away from his men. A young man in a faded naval uniform slipped into the clinic. He moved quickly, head down, and went straight to Keiko. They spoke in urgent whispers. Zay couldn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone. Fear, pleading. Keiko's face hardened. She shook her head. The man grabbed her wrist. She pulled away. Problem? Reed called from the door, his voice sharp. The man froze. Keiko spoke rapidly in Japanese, then in halting English. My brother. No problem. He, worried. I work here. Tell him to leave, Reed said. Curfew rules. The brother looked at Zay, then at Reed, then back at Keiko. He said something bitter and left. Mrs. Sato touched Keiko's shoulder and whispered something low. Keiko's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She turned back to her patients. At the door, a clerk stamped ration coupons, checking each family's booklet against a list. Food was tight. Medicine was tighter. Everything had to be counted, controlled. Zay watched Keiko's hands move. Steady, precise, gentle. She didn't flinch from the work, even when her own brother called it shameful. The sign creaked on its nails, swaying in the wind. The storm hit just after the power died. The last battery sputtered out, plunging the clinic into near darkness. Rain roared on the tin roof like a living thing, and then, in the sudden hush between thunderclaps, a woman screamed. Two men carried her in on a straw futon, her face slick with sweat. Mrs. Sato took one look and barked orders in Japanese. Keiko ran for towels and boiled water. Labor, Reed said quietly to Zay. Complicated. Zay's stomach clenched. He'd been trained for battlefield wounds, not childbirth. But Mrs. Sato gestured him closer, and he understood. She needed everything he had. Pulse weak, Keiko said in careful English. Baby not coming. Zay looked at the locked supply cabinet on the American side. Inside, morphine, oxygen, surgical clamps. All inventoried, all restricted. He met Reed's eyes. Reed gave the smallest nod. Zay broke the lock with a scalpel handle. The morphine dulled the mother's screaming. The oxygen regulator hissed, feeding her strength. Mrs. Sato guided Keiko's hands, teaching her in whispers while the storm raged. Zay held the lantern steady, his arms aching. Thunder shook the walls. Lightning turned the room white, then black. And then a cry. High, furious, alive. Mrs. Sato wrapped the baby in a clean cloth and laid him on the mother's chest. Keiko's hands were shaking now, but she smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since Zay had met her. Arigato, the mother whispered, tears streaming. Zay relocked the cabinet and pulled out his notebook. He wrote down the time, the morphine dose, the vials used. His handwriting was careful, exact. It wouldn't matter. The lock was broken. The inventory was wrong. If Harlan found out, there'd be hell to pay. He glanced at the door and felt the weight of morning settling on his shoulders like wet canvas. The puddles in the courtyard reflected a pale sky. Dawn had come too quickly. Zay stood near the supply cabinet, exhausted but calm. The mother and baby slept peacefully inside. Mrs. Sato had gone home an hour ago. Keiko was cleaning instruments, her movements slow with fatigue. Boots on gravel, many boots. Two white MPs pushed through the door first, then Harlan. His face was tight, his jaw set. Behind him came Reed, already trying to explain. Sir, there was a medical emergency. Quiet, Sergeant. Harlan walked straight to the cabinet. The broken lock dangled from the hasp. He pulled a clipboard from under his arm and began checking inventory numbers against the vials inside. One of the MPs opened a drawer, the one Zay had forced when the key jammed during the storm. The wood was splintered. "Who authorized this?" Harlan's voice was ice. "I did," Zay said. "The woman was dying. The baby was. You broke U.S. Army property and used restricted medicine on an enemy civilian without permission." Harlan made a note on his clipboard. "Where's the penicillin? The crate that was here yesterday?" Keiko looked up, her face suddenly pale. "I moved it," she said quietly in English, "to keep safe from thieves." "You moved it." Harlan turned to her. "Where?" She hesitated. "Basement. I bring now." MPs, go with her. Keiko and one MP disappeared down the narrow stairs. Minutes passed. When they returned, the MP was empty-handed. "It's not there, sir." Harlan's neck flushed red. "Sergeant Reed, your detachment is confined to quarters pending a full audit. Load your men into the trucks. Now, sir." Reed's voice was controlled, but his hands were fists. "We saved 3 lives last night. That's what medics do." "What medics do is follow orders." Harlan stepped closer to Reed. "You want to explain to Division Command why controlled substances went missing under your watch?" Zay caught Keiko's eye. She looked stricken, helpless. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, but the MPs were already moving, herding the black medics toward the door. The sign flapped in the wind as they left. The segregated bivouac sat in the shadow of a shuttered naval storehouse. A rope line stretched between posts, marking the temporary confinement area. An MP stood guard, looking bored. Harlan made the detachment sit on the wet ground outside the mess tent while he went through their gear, counting every bandage, every vial, every tin of sulfa powder. His pen scratched against paper for 2 hours. Zay sat with his hands on his knees and tried not to think about the clinic, about Keiko's face, about the mother who'd almost died. Reed paced nearby, his jaw working. Finally, he pulled out his own notebook and began writing. His handwriting was small, precise, formal. A protest memo citing field regulations about emergency care, about medical judgment, about the duty to preserve life. When Harlan finally finished, he held up 2 sheets of paper. "Corporal Freeman, you're charged with unauthorized use of government property and destruction of equipment. Sergeant Reed, you're charged with failure to supervise and maintain proper custody of supplies. Charges will be reviewed by the base commander." He handed copies to Reed and walked away without another word. The squad sat in silence. The stew in the mess tent had gone cold. Someone passed around canteen cups of bitter coffee. A driver from the motor pool stopped by with news. Fever cases were spreading in the harbor shacks. Rice water stool, children crying all night. Maybe cholera. Maybe worse. Zay lay on his cot as the sun set, listening to the distant sound of coughing carried on the wind. People were sick. People needed help. And he was trapped behind a rope line, waiting for judgment. He pulled out the letter to his mother and added one line. "They don't want us to help, Mama. But we did anyway." Reed set his wristwatch alarm and said nothing, but his eyes were on the western sky, where the clinic hill rose in the distance. Keiko ran through the narrow streets as the sun dropped toward the harbor. Her nurse's uniform was damp with sweat. She had to find it. She had to find the penicillin before Harlan came back. The harbor shacks leaned against each other like wounded soldiers. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Women boiled water in salvaged pots, and everywhere the smell, the sour, rotten smell of sickness. Mrs. Sato met her at the entrance to the fishing co-op shed. 3 more children tonight, the old woman said. Maybe more tomorrow. The medicine, Keiko said breathlessly. Did you see, your brother came this morning. Mrs. Sato's voice was flat. He took something wrapped in cloth. He ran. Keiko's stomach turned to stone. She found Haru hiding behind a stack of fish crates. His face gray with shame. Where is it? She demanded. I sold 2 vials, he whispered. I needed money for a boat ticket, to get south, away from— You sold medicine while children are dying? I didn't know, his voice cracked. I thought you had extra. I thought— Keiko grabbed his collar. Who did you sell to? The policeman. The one who watches the clinic. Of course. The same man who'd been taking bribes during the war, who controlled the black market, who looked at the American supplies like treasure. Footsteps behind her. She turned. The policeman himself stood there, smiling coldly. Nurse Takahashi, I hear the Americans are accusing you of theft. He lit a cigarette. If they charge you, your family will suffer. But if you tell them the black soldiers took the medicine, I could help you. I could make the story clean. No. Think carefully. Your brother already broke the law. I could report him tonight. He glanced at Haru. Or we could make an arrangement. Keiko felt rage rising in her chest, hot and bitter, but she kept her voice steady. I will fix this myself. She turned and walked away, Haru stumbling after her. Behind them, a child wailed, and a mother called for water that wouldn't come. Reed sat in the dark tent with his protest memo in one hand and his common sense in the other. We should go anyway, one of the medics whispered. Slip past the MP at midnight. Do what we can. And then what? Reed's voice was tired. Harlan finds out. We all get court-martialed. The clinic gets shut down. Keiko and Mrs. Sato lose their only source of supplies. Is that what you want? Silence. We do this the right way, Reed said. Or we don't do it at all. But the right way was slow. The right way meant paperwork and permission, and waiting while people died. Zay sharpened his scalpel with careful strokes, the blade catching the lamplight. He'd already packed a small kit, bandages, iodine, 2 precious morphine syrettes from his personal allotment, just in case. You thinking about running? Reed asked quietly. Thinking about helping. Don't. Reed leaned forward. I mean it, Freeman. They'll throw you in the stockade and lose the key. A black soldier, disobeying orders, disappearing into a Japanese town at night? You know what they'll call that. Zay knew. Desertion. Fraternization. Words that could end him. He set down the scalpel. Reed pulled out clean paper and began drafting a formal request for deployment. He wrote about public health emergency and humanitarian operations and orderly medical response. He wrote in the language of regulations, trying to find the crack in the system that would let them through. When he finished, he made a carbon copy and folded both carefully. I'll hand this to Harlan at 0600, Reed said. He's a coward, but he's not stupid. If cholera spreads to the base, his career is finished. Zay lay back on his cot. Outside, someone played a harmonica. Low, mournful, a spiritual his grandmother used to sing. He closed his eyes and heard Keiko's voice in his memory. Don't be afraid. He wasn't afraid. He was angry. Reed stood at attention in Harlan's office, a borrowed schoolroom with a desk and a wall map. Harlan looked like he hadn't slept. You want me to send your detachment back to the harbor? Harlan's voice was sharp. After yesterday's disaster? Sir, people are dying. Cholera doesn't care about regulations. Neither do I, Sergeant. What I care about is order, control. You broke. With respect, sir, you could use this. Reed kept his voice steady. A successful relief operation, documented, photographed. Division would see you managing a crisis, maintaining calm. That looks good in a report. Harlan's eyes narrowed. He was listening. Or, Reed continued, the outbreak spreads, hits the base, and the record shows you had trained medical personnel sitting idle behind a rope line. The silence stretched. A typewriter clacked in another room. Somewhere, a telephone rang. Harlan picked up Reed's memo and read it again. His hand trembled slightly. Limited deployment, he said finally. Supervised by MPs. You follow every order to the letter. And he pulled out a requisition form. I'm bringing a Navy photographer. If this goes well, I want documentation. If it goes badly, he didn't finish. Understood, sir. Harlan signed the form with a flourish and called for a runner. Get me Lieutenant Morris from Public Affairs. Tell him I need a photographer at the harbor by 1000 hours. Reed took the signed orders and walked back to the bivouac at a pace just short of running. When he reached the tent, Zay was already on his feet, kit in hand. Pack up, Reed said. We're going back. The rope line came down. The MP stepped aside, and the squad loaded into the truck before anyone could change their minds. The harbor shacks looked worse in daylight. Makeshift shelters leaned against the seawall. Laundry hung limp. Mothers crouched over sick children, their faces hollow. Reed organized quickly. Freeman, set up triage here. Davis, boil water, 10-minute rolling boil. Monroe, get those crates unloaded. Move. The black medics worked with the precision of men who knew their lives depended on doing everything perfectly. MPs watched from the edges, rifles slung but present. Zay spread a tarp and began sorting patients, critical, serious, stable. An old man with sunken eyes, a child who wouldn't stop crying, a young mother whose pulse barely registered. Keiko appeared, breathless, carrying a cloth bundle. I found some, she whispered. Not all, but some. She unwrapped 4 vials of penicillin, not the full crate, but enough to start. Where? Zay asked. I buy back. From... She hesitated. From Bad Man. Zay understood. Black market. Her brother's theft was still a secret, at least for now. Mrs. Sato arrived with 2 neighbors and a handcart full of buckets. She directed townspeople like a general, setting up hand-washing stations, organizing water distribution, keeping panic at bay. Harlan stood near the MPs, watching. The Navy photographer set up his equipment, adjusting his camera, loading film plates. A woman collapsed near the makeshift ward. Her child, maybe 2 years old, turned blue. Oxygen, Zay shouted. Reed grabbed the cylinder from the truck. Harlan stepped forward, hand raised. That's for U.S. personnel only. Zay turned slowly. Sir, the child can't breathe. I gave you a limited deployment, Corporal. Limited means following supply regulations. The child's lips were purple now. The mother screamed. Zay looked at Reed. Reed looked at the MPs. The photographer's camera sat on its tripod, lens pointed at them all. And in that frozen moment, Zay made his choice. Zay knelt beside the child and fitted the oxygen mask over her tiny face. Corporal Freeman, that's a direct order. Don't be afraid, Zay said softly to the mother, not looking at Harlan. He adjusted the regulator. The oxygen hissed. The child's chest rose, fell, rose again. Reed stepped between Zay and the nearest MP, his body a wall. Medical emergency, sir. Field protocol. This is insubordination. But the child was breathing. Color returned to her lips. The mother sobbed and clutched Zay's sleeve, words pouring out in Japanese. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Keiko translated, her voice shaking. She says you saved her daughter's life. The photographer's camera shutter clicked. Once, twice, 3 times. Harlan's face went white. He spun toward the photographer. What are you? Documentation, sir, as ordered. The photographer changed the film plate calmly. I'm recording the medical operation. Behind them, someone had propped up the clinic's segregation sign against a post, an MP trying to maintain proper order. The weathered board read, separate treatment areas. The photographer adjusted his angle. Shutter click. In the frame. Black medics saving Japanese children while the sign loomed behind them. Townspeople watched in silence. Mrs. Sato stood with her arms crossed, satisfaction in her eyes. The mothers formed a loose circle around the ward, protecting it with their presence. Harlan's hands trembled. Sergeant Reed, you'll answer for this. Yes, sir, Reed said quietly. We all will. But the child was breathing, and the camera had seen everything. And in that moment, the truth was louder than any regulation. Zay removed the mask slowly, gently. The mother bowed so low her forehead touched the ground. He helped her up, his throat tight. It's okay, he said. It's okay now. Keiko's hand brushed his for just a second. Brief, warm, human. The oxygen cylinder hissed on, feeding life where orders had tried to withhold it. The clinic basement smelled of damp earth and old paper. Keiko and Mrs. Sato searched through crates by candlelight, looking for the supply ledgers Harlan would demand. "Here," Mrs. Sato said, pulling a notebook from behind a stack of folded linens. But it wasn't a supply ledger. It was smaller, the handwriting tight and nervous. Dates, names. Amounts of rice, sake, medicine, all traded for cash or favors. The policeman's private records. Keiko's hands shook as she turned the pages. He was taking bribes during the war, selling rations. A sound. Footsteps on the stairs. They both froze. Haru emerged from the shadows, his face gaunt. "I heard you come down. Keiko, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Where have you been hiding?" "Here, behind the old equipment. I couldn't face you. I couldn't." His voice broke. "I took the medicine. I sold it. People died because of me." Mrs. Sato's voice was sharp. "Yes, they did." "I can fix it," Haru said desperately. "The buyer, the policeman, he still has most of it. I know where he keeps his supply. I can tell the Americans. You'll go to prison," Keiko said. "I know." Haru met her eyes. "But maybe that's what I deserve." Keiko looked at the ledger in her hands, then at her brother. She thought of Zay risking everything to save the child. She thought of Reed standing between his men and the MPs. Courage wasn't just loud defiance, it was also quiet truth. "We go together," she said finally. "We tell everything. The theft, the black market, all of it." Mrs. Sato tucked the ledger into her apron. "Then we go to the American officer, before he comes to us." They climbed the stairs into gray afternoon light. At the top, a figure waited. The policeman, smiling his cold smile. "Looking for something?" he asked. The schoolroom office was cramped. Harlan sat behind the desk, his uniform crisp despite the long day. Reed stood near the wall, arms crossed. An MP guarded the door. Keiko entered first, the ledger hidden in her apron. Mrs. Sato and Haru followed. "Nurse Takahashi." Harlan's voice was controlled. "I assume you've come to explain the missing penicillin." "Yes, sir." Keiko's English was careful. "I moved medicine during storm. To protect from thieves. But my brother," she gestured to Haru. "He took, he sold. I am responsible." Harlan leaned forward. "Your brother stole U.S. government property?" "Yes, sir." "And you're confessing this why?" Keiko pulled out the ledger and set it on the desk. "Because truth is important, and because this also important." Harlan opened the ledger. His eyes scanned the pages, dates, names, amounts. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding to cold satisfaction. "This is evidence of black market operations." He looked at Keiko. "Who kept these records?" "Local policeman. He took bribes during war. He still controls black market now. He threatened my family. He threatened me. But I want truth." Reed stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, the nurse is offering testimony that could expose corruption and recover the missing supplies. In exchange, she's asking that the charges against my men be reconsidered based on the facts." Harlan was quiet for a long moment. His fingers drummed the desk. This wasn't just about medicine anymore. This was about evidence, jurisdiction, control. A corruption case could look good in reports, could make him look decisive. "I'll take your statement," he said finally. "Both of you, under oath, and I'll hold the evidence." He pocketed the ledger without offering a receipt. Keiko bowed. As she turned to leave, she caught Reed's eye. He nodded once, acknowledgement, respect. An MP escorted her toward the door. The night felt colder than it should. Dawn came soft over the harbor. Zay scrubbed his hands in a bucket of boiled water and watched the ward come to life. 3 days since the outbreak began. 2 days since the confrontation with Harlan. The fever cases had peaked yesterday and were finally dropping. Clean water protocols were working. Mothers knew to boil everything now, to wash hands, to separate the sick from the well. Reed checked supplies while Mrs. Sato directed a line of volunteers hauling fresh water from the communal well. Someone had painted signs in Japanese. Boil 10 minutes, cover food, wash hands. Haru worked silently among the volunteers, hauling buckets despite his exhaustion. He'd turned himself in yesterday. The MPs had taken him away, then returned him under guard to help with the emergency. His trial would come later. The local policeman tried one last move. He appeared at the ward entrance, flanked by 2 town officials, and pointed at Keiko. "This woman collaborated with the enemy," he announced in Japanese. "She brought shame to—" He didn't finish. A circle of mothers closed around Keiko, their faces hard. Mrs. Sato stepped forward and raised her voice. "This woman saved children. You sold their medicine." She pulled out a copy of the ledger. She'd made one before giving the original to Harlan. "Your bribes are written here. Your thefts, your lies." The crowd murmured. Angry murmurs. The policeman's face went gray. He turned and pushed through the crowd, his officials hurrying after him. The mothers didn't move. They stood like a wall around Keiko until the danger had passed. Mrs. Sato bowed to them. They bowed back. The photographer captured it. The circle of protection, the raised faces, the morning light. Reed received word at noon. Harlan was reducing charges. Formal reprimands for Zay and Reed, but no court-martial. The Division Public Health Office had sent a commendation for effective emergency response. The photos would appear in a bulletin. The ward grew quieter as children stabilized. Mothers brought rice balls wrapped in clean cloth, gratitude they couldn't speak but could offer. Zay checked a toddler's pulse, steady, strong. The child grabbed his finger and held on. Across the ward, Keiko worked steadily, her movements practiced and sure. Their eyes met. No words. Just the weight of what they'd done together. The schoolroom office smelled of ink and cigarette smoke. The photographer spread contact sheets across the desk while Harlan studied them. There, black medics at work, faces focused and professional. There, Keiko and Mrs. Sato organizing townspeople. There, the oxygen cylinder, the blue-faced child, Reed standing between his men and authority. And there, in the corner of frame after frame, the segregation sign. A courier knocked and entered with a telegram. "From Division Public Health, sir." Harlan read it twice. His jaw tightened. The telegram praised exemplary emergency response and requested photos for a bulletin about occupation medical operations. It mentioned effective coordination between Army medical personnel and local civilian volunteers. It used words like humanitarian and cooperation, but the photo showed the truth, that cooperation had happened despite regulations, not because of them. Harlan set down the telegram. "Which images are you submitting?" The photographer pointed. "This series. The clean water station, the rehydration protocols, the medical triage system. Standard documentation. Not the one with the oxygen cylinder?" "That one too, sir. It shows emergency medical intervention, life-saving care." The photographer's voice was neutral, professional. "It's powerful." Harlan picked up a pen and began writing. 2 documents. 1. Partial commendations for the medical detachment, citing professional conduct during a public health emergency. 2. Formal reprimands for unauthorized use of equipment and failure to maintain proper supply custody. He signed both with shaking hands. "Sergeant Reed," he called. Reed entered and stood at attention. Harlan slid the papers across the desk. "Read and sign." Reed read carefully. His face showed nothing. He signed both documents. "Your unit rotates out in 48 hours, Harlan said. "Until then, complete the harbor operation and prepare for inspection." "Yes, sir." Harlan dismissed him. Alone, he stared at the photographs again, evidence of his own smallness captured in silver and light. The clinic ward glowed in late afternoon sun. Zay moved from cot to cot, checking pulses, adjusting blankets. speaking soft words in his broken Japanese. Keiko worked beside him, translating thanks, explaining dosages, teaching mothers how to continue care after the Americans left. A toddler grabbed Zay's thumb and wouldn't let go. The mother smiled, tired, grateful, alive. "You rotate soon?" Keiko asked carefully. 2 days, maybe 3. She nodded and turned back to her work, but her hands moved slower now. They'd sketched a poster together, crude but clear. Mrs. Sato had it copied onto boards that now hung throughout the town. Boil water, wash hands, cover food in Japanese and English. "After we go," Zay said, "you keep doing this. Teach everyone." "Yes, I teach." She paused. "You? Good teacher." "You're better. You knew all this already. I just brought supplies. You brought more." She touched her chest. "You brought hope? Courage? I don't know English word." "Kindness," Zay said quietly. "Yes, kindness." The sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the walls gold. Somewhere outside, a gramophone played a scratchy pre-war song. Children's voices called to each other in the street. Reed appeared in the doorway. "Load up in 15 minutes. Curfew." Zay nodded. He finished his rounds, then lingered at the threshold. Keiko stood in the center of the ward, surrounded by mothers and children and the ordinary miracle of healing. She turned and met his eyes. Her bow was deep, formal, full of everything words couldn't say. He returned it, equally deep, equally full. Then he stepped into the corridor, where Reed waited with the rest of the squad. The truck engine coughed to life. The sun stained the clouds red and gold. "Back at first light." Reed said, "One more day to finish up." But Zay knew the truth. Some things couldn't be finished, only carried forward. The mess tent smelled of burnt coffee and damp canvas. Rain started again, drumming softly on the roof. The medics sat on wooden benches, tired, but lighter somehow, the kind of tired that comes from good work. Harlan entered with papers in hand. The tent went quiet. "Attention!" They stood. Harlan's voice was flat, formal. "Corporal Freeman, you're hereby reprimanded for unauthorized use of government medical supplies. Sergeant Reed, you're reprimanded for failure to maintain proper custody and supervision." He set down the first document. "These reprimands will be entered into your service records." No one spoke. Harlan picked up the second paper. "The Division Public Health Office has issued the following commendation. For professional and effective medical response during a civilian health emergency, the detachment is recognized for exemplary service in support of occupation humanitarian operations." He paused. "Effective immediately." He laid both documents on the makeshift table. Reed stepped forward and signed his name twice, once for the reprimand, once for the commendation. Zay did the same. The pen scratched, the rain drummed. The contradiction hung in the air like smoke. Harlan cleared his throat. "Rotation orders. You ship out in 48 hours. Report to the railhead at 0600, day after tomorrow." He turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, the child lived. They all lived. He left before anyone could respond. The tent stayed quiet for a moment. Then someone laughed, short, bitter, relieved. "We saved lives and got yelled at for it," Davis muttered. "Welcome to the Army," Reed said, but there was no anger in his voice, just weary acceptance. Zay pulled out his airmail paper and wrote by lamplight. "Dear Mama, we're coming home soon. I learned some Japanese. I met people who were scared, then brave. I think that's what kindness does. It makes people brave enough to be human again." He tucked a pressed persimmon leaf into the envelope, orange and delicate, a piece of this place he'd carry home. Morning sun broke through thinning clouds. The clinic courtyard smelled of wet stone and disinfectant. Townspeople arrived early, mothers with children, old men with coughs, families seeking one last check before the Americans left. Mrs. Sato stood at the clinic entrance, arms crossed, watching as an MP approached the segregation sign. She said something sharp in Japanese. The MP paused, looked to Reed. She says the sign should come down, Reed translated roughly. Says it's no longer needed. The MP glanced around. No Harlan in sight. He shrugged and pried the nails loose. The board came away from the wall, leaving pale rectangles where paint hadn't faded. A few mothers clapped softly. Children watched, curious. The MP leaned the sign against the back wall, face down. No ceremony, just removal. Inside, Zay and Keiko worked on inventory. She'd learned his system, counting supplies, writing bilingual labels in careful block letters and neat kana. When the next unit arrived, they'd understand what they had and how to use it. Bandages, poltai, iodine. Yodo, morphine, kinkyuji nomi, moruhine. A runner arrived breathless. He handed Reed a sealed envelope. Reed opened it, read, folded it carefully. He found Zay checking a cabinet lock. Official, we leave tomorrow at dawn. Zay's hands stilled. Tomorrow. Harbor pickup at 0530, then the railhead. Base hospital in Tokyo by evening, then a troop ship within the week. Keiko stood near the supply table, close enough to hear. Her face stayed composed, but her fingers pressed white against the edge of the cabinet. Mrs. Sato appeared with a cloth bundle. For journey, she said in slow English. Rice cakes, clean bandages, medicine for road. Reed accepted the bundle with a bow. Thank you for everything. The old woman's eyes were bright. You saved many. You showed kindness. She touched her heart. We remember. The afternoon stretched long. Patients came and went. The light moved across the floor, and with every passing hour, the weight of goodbye grew heavier. Keiko found Zay in a small side room, packing medical supplies into their crates. Afternoon light slanted through a shuttered window. A kettle sat on a dying brazier, barely steaming. I have something, she said quietly. From her apron, she pulled his phrase book, the worn, pocket-sized book he'd used that first day. But it looked different now. Every margin was filled with her neat handwriting. Japanese medical terms matched to English, phrases of comfort, pronunciation guides, and on the inside cover, written carefully in English, courage is a quiet thing. Zay took it slowly, turning pages. His throat tightened. You kept this? You left on table. I think I add words, help you remember. I won't forget. They stood in the narrow space between duty and desire, close enough to touch, but holding the distance that regulations demanded. Where you go next? Keiko asked. Tokyo, then home maybe, or Korea, wherever they send us. He closed the book. You? Here, always here, patients need me. She smiled faintly. Mrs. Sato trains me. I become, how you say, head nurse? You'll be good at it. Because you teach me. How to be brave when things are hard. A pan in the corner dripped, tick-tick, into a bucket. The ceiling leak they'd never fixed. Zay wanted to say so much, about fear and courage and the way she'd stood between her patients and danger, about how her hands had saved lives, as surely as his, about how, in another world, they might have had time, but an MP appeared in the doorway. Curfew in 30 minutes, Corporal. Copy that. Zay pocketed the book. Tomorrow at the harbor, early. I will be there, Keiko said. He bowed. She bowed lower. And then he walked into the fading light, carrying her words and her courage with him. Dawn came cold and gray. Gulls cried over the harbor. The truck sat idling, exhaust rising in white clouds. The squad loaded gear in silence. Duffels, medical crates, helmets hung on rifle straps. Reed checked his roster. The MPs stood nearby, hands in pockets, ready for the last escort to the railhead. Zay was tying down a crate when he saw her. Keiko walked across the wet stones, carrying a small cloth parcel. Her nurse's uniform was clean, pressed. Her hair was pinned back. She dressed with care for this goodbye. She stopped a respectful distance away and bowed. Then she offered the parcel. For you, for road. Inside, a spare field dressing, folded, precise. A paper with hand-drawn diagrams, the water stations, the sanitation protocols, everything they built together. And wrapped in cloth, 2 rice cakes that still smelled faintly of Mrs. Sato's kitchen. "Thank you," Zay said, his voice rough. Keiko's eyes filled. "Watashi wa kowakunai." The words came slow, deliberate, carrying all the weight of what she'd learned. "I am not afraid." Zay felt something crack open in his chest. "Don't be afraid," he answered softly. "Never be afraid." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she smiled. "You teach me, not just medicine, courage." Reed appeared, gave them a moment of privacy by checking the truck's tire. Keiko bowed deeply. Zay returned it, holding the bow long enough to memorize her face, the set of her shoulders, the strength in her eyes, the grace she carried despite everything. When he straightened, Mrs. Sato had arrived with a small group of mothers and children. They stood in a line, silent, hands raised in farewell. Harlan's jeep pulled up. He stepped out, papers in hand, and gave a curt nod. Not apology, not friendship, just acknowledgement. "Mount up," Reed called. Zay climbed into the truck bed. The engine coughed and roared. The convoy began to roll. Keiko stood very still, one hand raised. Zay raised his in return, holding it there until the truck rounded the corner and she disappeared from view. The road unwound through fields of rice stubble and stands of persimmon trees. Morning mist clung to the low places. The convoy passed through a checkpoint, where white MPs waved them through without a second glance at the black unit. Zay sat near the tailgate holding Keiko's parcel in his lap. The truck hit a rut and his thumb caught in the phrasebook. Small pain. He welcomed it, something to anchor him in this moment, this leaving. Reed sat across from him, staring at nothing. Finally, he spoke. "Rumor is we're going to Korea next. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year. Then home." "Home," Zay repeated. The word felt strange. "What'll you do when we're discharged?" Zay thought about it. "Go back to Alabama. Help my mama. Maybe study to be a real doctor, if the GI Bill's worth anything for us." "They'll make it hard. They always do." Zay opened the phrasebook to Keiko's note. "Courage is a quiet thing. But maybe that's okay. Maybe hard is where the good work happens." The truck rolled past a roadside shrine, paper cranes fluttering in the wind. Someone had left offerings, rice, flowers, prayers for safe journeys. Zay closed the book and tucked it into his breast pocket, right over his heart. The convoy climbed a hill. For a moment, he could see back toward the coast, the harbor, the clinic hill rising above the town, the sea beyond. Then the road dipped and the view was gone. Davis pulled out his harmonica and played something low and slow. The other medics hummed along, no words, just the sound of tired men heading toward whatever came next. Reed closed his eyes. Zay watched the countryside pass, green and gold and impossibly beautiful, despite all the ugliness war had carved into it. The engine's growl carried them forward, away from one chapter and toward the next. The base hospital parade ground was swept clean. Chalk lines marked where units should stand. The flag stirred in the afternoon breeze. The black detachment formed up, backs straight, boots polished, faces lifted. Reed called them to attention. They snapped into position. Harlan stood before them with his clipboard, his voice carrying across the open space. "By order of Division Command, the following personnel are recognized for medical service during occupation operations." He read their names, one by one. "Commended for effective humanitarian response." A pause. "Also noted for the record, reprimands for supply irregularities and procedural violations." He looked up. "Both entries will appear in service records." The contradiction stood there, permanent and official. Praise and punishment side by side. The Navy photographer stood nearby, camera ready. One last photo for the file. The black medical unit at attention, disciplined and professional. Their work documented for history. The shutter clicked. Harlan dismissed them. "Proceed to transport. You ship out at 1900 hours. The formation broke. Men hoisted duffels and moved toward the trucks that would take them to the railhead, then the port, then the troop ship home. Zay climbed aboard last. His hand rested on the phrasebook in his pocket. He heard Keiko's voice in memory, "Watashi wa kawakunai," and his own answer, "Don't be afraid." The words felt bigger now, not just for her, not just for him, for everyone who'd been taught to fear and had learned to be human instead. The truck pulled away from the parade ground. Zay looked west, toward where the sun would set, toward where the clinic stood on its hill above the sea. "Don't be afraid," he whispered to himself, to the world, to anyone still learning what courage meant. The engine growled low and steady. The convoy rolled forward. And somewhere inside him, something like hope, quiet, stubborn, alive, rolled forward too.